You know, there's a ton of games out there at any one time, and part of my job as a reviewer is to go through them before even playing them and see which games look like they are worth my time. But as the chaos of AI and my job crashed into a brick wall, I found myself lately struggling at times, picking some all-time bad choices to stream in the recent weeks. But what's funny during that time is a random follower on Twitter decided that, hey, maybe Dragnix would like this game and recommended it to me. I'm glad he did. This Brazilian game named Subversive Memories came out on the PC, specifically Steam, on April 8th, 2026 for the price of $11.99. It took me about 4 hours to beat and obtain all 3 endings available. With shadows crawling all over the place, filled with misery and death, will Subversive Memories do enough for you to give this small indie game a chance? That's what I'm here to find out. You'd think that with this being a survival horror game, I would start with the gameplay, but I'm actually going to start with the story, because this is what intrigued me as the game went on and made it stand out from other games in the genre. Although the basic premise you have seen before. You're a young woman, Renata, who finds herself out of an abandoned military base at the start of the game after sort of crashing your car. Just like every survival horror protagonist, Renata must make her way through this place, learning more and more about what happened there and how she is connected to the secrets surrounding it. And while it is typical setup that you've seen, what's behind its execution is what really drew me in. See, while there are definitely unnatural elements present in the story of Subversive Memories, the time period and backdrop of the game is very much based in reality. Specifically, it's a story that takes place within the 1970s of Brazil, which was undergoing a period of a brutal dictatorship that silenced anybody who resisted them. Which may be confusing if you don't know the history of Brazil and play this game at first, because you'll see anti-communist posters in the military base, and you'll think, wait, this is the dominant faction? And the thing is, it confused me, but that was used to fight the resistance in the panic of the Red Scare. It was propaganda, or at least with my understanding of Brazilian history after reading up on it. See, despite not being Brazilian, the game's setting and historical events made me want to read more about the history of the country. And for a game that's obviously developed by passionate members of that country, that's one of the best things they could ask for in my perspective. It's able to take those elements and integrate them with the more supernatural parts of the plot, giving that feeling of tortured and unrelenting souls unable to pass on from this world and put them into the actual gameplay and your feelings as well. You do learn as you go along of several of these characters that were going through this regime, and some of what they went through, yeah, it'll get to ya. But it's also the fact that there's little elements that they included here that really sell this world well. Little touches like the Brazilian lottery, which was banned at a certain point in the country, help ground the story with a little bit of daily life. And these little touches can come in a variety of ways, whether it's an audio broadcast of the news, or just the posters that you come across. But it doesn't overdo it to a horrible extent. And part of what's fascinating to me is that you can apply many of the history's more fascist and more brutal regimes and see parallels to the story happening here. And it doesn't feel that far off or that much disconnected from, well, modern life, despite the Brazilian origin. And I know that I'm going to be touching the literal hot stove on this, but it was fascinating to see the parallels to the current American administration, in particular, and how it handles dissension and resistance to this story. In fact, it probably hit more close to home for me than it would have 4 years ago. With that said, if you're afraid that this game is political in nature, well, it is, but not in the way of being a modern commentary. It's a commentary about those in power and those who use that power for sure, but it doesn't go out of the way to make modern connections. It really does connect it to the past, using specific dates and specific events to really put it in perspective. If you want to make those connections, though, you'll have to make those yourself. What I also love about how this story is told is the use of limited information at the start of the game, and how key elements are learned throughout the game, giving more and more light to the situation. Very similar to piecing the story in a detective story. It's fed at the right rate. You learn little details and start to guess some of the people involved, and then get a little bit more to refine your thoughts and make new predictions. And it's also nice that when you get more information, things that were redacted in files start to appear. Which, yeah, is a nice touch, even if you could guess some of that information before that happened. Now, is this an epic tale of any sort? No, and I don't think it's trying to be. It does seem to be a personal story, and I wouldn't be surprised if the writers did adapt a personal story of theirs or combine several of theirs together. It does have moments with details that feel a little bit too specific, that it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, especially in some of the horror parts. With the story out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the gameplay, which is of course survival horror at its roots. This is a mash between Resident Evil and Alan Wake, with an emphasis on avoidance and not backing yourself into a corner. The monsters, as mentioned, are shadows that will creep toward you and can only be easily seen in the presence of light. The way you have to fight them is with a flashlight, which can send out a pulse in the direction that it's pointed in, stunning the monster briefly and doing damage, showing its silhouette in the meanwhile. It takes about 3 or so flashes to kill a basic enemy. However, your weapon has a battery hook to it, and gives you about 7 flashes before you get into its emergency mode. It may be more, but that's around the right number. In emergency mode, it does recharge the battery slowly, giving you 1 charge in due time. But in the middle of a fight, that can be stressful. Gonna be honest here, most of the enemies and actual monsters are relatively easy to deal with as long as you go slow and steady and don't run into danger. Think of being in a forest at night. Don't just run blindly into the darkness, or you'll get eaten. The enemies are reasonably designed in terms of catching up to you, however, moving along fast enough to pressure and scare you, but not enough where you can't gain distance and regroup. The fact is, the worst situations in this game are ones you get into by being too eager, backing yourself into a corner where you can't make it out, or rushing into an area and running across these shadows and not thinking about things. I like the mechanics here, but the fact is I do wish the game did more in terms of going outside the box in terms of combat scenarios. Pincer attacks, changing environments so you had to deal with shadows, and hell, different light flashes in terms of having to deal with maybe shadows coming from different areas. In addition, part of me really wonders how more interesting this combat would have been if it was always in emergency mode, because those are the most tense moments of the game. When you have an extra battery to easily pop in, the game doesn't feel as scary, and the game does give you enough batteries, if you're doing what a good survival horror player should and looking around every nook and cranny possible, to get through the game mostly. While I do have reservations about the combat, I can't say that about the puzzle design as a whole. This is where I think the game really shines, while not being overly difficult. It's clever, and also really plays to those who think about the surroundings and the situation they are in to find the solution. It's also one that's hard to talk about directly without giving away sort of clues on the type of thinking that could come up, and that's something that I don't want to do to those people wanting to play this game. I don't want to give any hints, because part of the best part is figuring it out on your own. Being like, well, let me put 2 and 2 together. What could this be? What could this element tell me? And those are the games that I really enjoy. Now, does that mean you're going to get stuck? Well, sort of, but not in the way that you think. This is one of those games where I know a lot of people may stop and say, well, I can't figure this out. Let me go look at a walkthrough. And to that I say, don't. No, seriously, don't. The game gives you enough clues. And if you don't know what exactly you're doing, maybe look around a little more and find some more information, because that can be what you need. You may find a file that ends up giving you a little bit more and poke you in the right direction. And that's the kind of thing that really will play to those who love exploration games or detective games. This is your kind of game. Even if you don't like horror, I think you'll enjoy the types of puzzles that this game put together. And I know that the comparison will be that it's a Resident Evil-like, and we'll wonder, okay, is it like the puzzles in those? I think it's a lot smarter than the puzzles in those. The puzzles in those, they're a little bit more, I don't want to say brute force, but a little bit more simple, almost like it doesn't want to challenge you. And I think Subversive Memories does a good job of challenging you without pushing you over the edge. You're not going to hurt your head. This is not a Baba is you situation. Now, the game comes in at about 3.5 hours for me. Although, if I knew what I was doing and were playing again, it would be closer to 2. The last half hour of the game was actually me trying to find the last item in order to get the complete ending, and literally going crazy while doing it, but it actually made for a very entertaining stream when I rewatched it back. Now, some people will look at that, amount of time played and look at the price and be like, is it really worth it? Yes. It's a silly argument in the end, especially when the content is so high. I understand people want bang for the buck, and honestly, I understand that. Here, I do think that the game is worth the price, although I will give. I do wish the game had more content, mostly because the content here was so good. It does sort of sadden me when I'm seeing millions being thrown at games that are obvious rehashes and, trying to play to popular trends, when this, while it is doing things that are similar in terms of, people are going to compare it to Alan Wake, and there is some similarities, it has its own unique style and feel, and it feels like if they were given a bit more budget and pushed it to another 2 hours of gameplay, it could have been a star in the indie scene. Unfortunately, it probably won't because it's not, too flashy, but hell, I'm talking about it and I'm telling you, it's pretty damn good. And usually when Dragnix says something is good, it's good. Weird for me to toot my own horn in one of these videos. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the presentation. On the surface, Subversive Memories may look like a lower budget indie game, but some of the decisions made on the presentation do uniquely make the game stand out in the horror genre, for better and for worse. The big thing here, given the content of the gameplay, is the lighting engine. For the type of gameplay that this is, it's pretty good, especially when you get into sections where there isn't any natural light and you can really see the beam focus and burst out in a cone-like shape. You really do feel the creeping darkness and how unsure you are of things outside your vision at times. The shadows moving feel unnatural, and when you get slight glimpses of it, it can add to the horror. But then there are times where I do start to question the lighting when it comes to sourcing. This room is a prime example with the emergency lights. The fact that there's not consistency in how light circles out of the right side still bothers me here. I get that light may be coming through the bars, but why is it specifically stopping halfway to the other door in the middle here? I don't see where that's coming from and why it's causing that particular pattern. It's a little weird, and there's those inconsistencies that I sit there go, wait, how is this working? It doesn't necessarily always have to be like 100% realistic. I just want consistency, and that's where I have some troubles with it. It's strange. There's definitely arguments to be made with some of the lower fidelity assets here, letting you fill in the blanks to a certain extent. And some of the best horror games do that. There is striking imagery, especially when using the light. The door here and the light in the elevator is a prime example of that. It's haunting in a lot of ways, and that's what I want to see. But there are points where I wonder if the game went too simple. This sequence, which I believe is supposed to be a dreamlike state, yeah, it feels more the Madness collection on Newgrounds more than anything. There are things in this game that bother me that really shouldn't on a rewatch, like the lights on this machine here. I don't know why, they just don't feel in place and they feel way too unnatural for what's going on here, and it's a game with, spirits and shadows and monsters. Why am I having a problem with this? Sound design here is what I think the game could have used a little bit of a bump on. I understand the intent here. There was a certain minimalistic element they were going for in a lot of ways. Part of the story is isolation, and the idea of only hearing your own footsteps at times does play into that. You do feel alone. And sure, once in a while you get sounds of machinery humming or the door opening and closing. But my bigger problem is the idea of those noises not really changing given circumstances or the environment. For example, if I'm on a metal floor walking, I do expect the sound to be a little different footsteps sound-wise than a solid tile floor. Now that may seem trivial and that I'm nitpicking, but that's the thing about a horror game. If the sound is consistent, it'll start to feel complacent and you'll start feeling more at ease. And that's not what I think they were going for in this horror game. The thing is, there are a lot of free and easy to use resources out there for indie devs when it comes to things like this. And yeah, I think in this situation, it would have been applicable in several cases to use those resources. Now, I'm not going to say that it is for everything in the game that you could have applied it for. Yes, you will need a little bit more budget to make some of the sounds for particular areas. So I understand the budget can only go so far, but I admit when re-listening to everything, I wanted more out of the sound. And it's not to say that the sound here is bad. There are good sound elements in the game. In particular, when you flash your flashlight, that sound sort of sticks in my head. But take a listen, and you'll hear some examples of what I'm talking about, where I feel like the sound just needed a little bit more. And then we go over here. Yeah, open it with a screwdriver. Okay, not yet. We'll come back for it. Yep, I never killed that one. I just ran by it. But I was like, you know what? Yeah.
Petrobras aplicará 5 bilhões de ienes no setor de energia elétrica. Previdência baixa normas para inscrição de empresas no IAPA. O governo do Ministério
Okay, so we got some
de jazida de zinco e chumbo de Morro Agudo das proximidades de Paracatu. As obras entortadas de 1 bilhão e 300 milhões.
Looking at my food waste to the trash bin. It's full of fry, Larry, and Spartan looks like rotten minute meat. Makes me sick.
Transformar-se no mais importante centro.
Oh, I'm not liking this. Okay, so wait, there's paint. So does that mean hatred and disgust? Okay, I'm going to write that down. Hatred. And as for music, the thing is that at a lot of times the game doesn't really focus on music. It really does want you to feel that isolation, but it will use music in the right circumstances. In particular, when you get attacked, the music starts to really get under your skin, like, oh god, here it comes, oh god, here it comes, what you would expect from a horror game. And of course, it has the save room music. its own variant of it, and quite frankly, maybe on par with Resident Evil's save music. I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. Now, a majority of the game you won't have music, and that's obviously purposeful, but when the music shows up, it does its job, and in some cases, very well. So take a listen, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. So this is your buddy's birthday. Everyone, happy birthday, Renata. I can't believe. Oh, okay. So that's the guy who was tortured. That I think is the general or somebody of importance. There it is. In the end, Subversive Memories is what I want an indie game to be, bringing an experience that's unique enough to recommend while still being a good game in its own right and having some familiarity. Sure, the combat could be better, although it's not horrible, and it's not revolutionizing anything in the industry, but not all games need to. The puzzles were great, and the story may turn off certain types of players, but it was mesmerizing to me. It was a great horror game and something that, especially if you like history and in particular politics and Brazilian history, you'll love it. It's the definition of a solid indie game, and that's why it gets an 85 out of 100, making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. In the end, Subversive Memories is what I want an indie game to be, bringing an experience that's unique enough to recommend while still being a good game in its own right and having some familiarity. Sure, the combat could be better, although it's not horrible, and it's not revolutionizing anything in the industry, but not all games need to. The puzzles were great, and the story may turn off certain types of players, but it was mesmerizing to me. It was a great horror game and something that, especially if you like history and in particular politics and Brazilian history, you'll love it. It's the definition of a solid indie game, and that's why it gets an 85 out of 100, making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories strongly, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. Now, obviously, there are certain people who will really be attracted to this game, and some that, well, won't. And that's fine. Games aren't for everybody all the time. It doesn't need to be. Anyway, that's it for this review. And yeah, this may be a little bit shorter of a review, but part of me doesn't really want to spoil story or gameplay elements, and, well, I think I got what I wanted to across. Anyway, if you liked this review, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and maybe join the Discord to give me ideas for games for me to cover. Because, well, obviously it worked for this one, and while I'm always looking for the next Valhalla, Wondersong, Never Awake, sometimes a good recommendation goes a long way. As for what I will review next, well, I'm not exactly sure. I'm still... Part of me is sitting here going, do I push the 2025 overlooked games list to the end of the year? Just because things have gotten so crazy at work for AI, I haven't had the time. Part of me is sitting there going, yeah, maybe. Part of me is like, no, you're going to just keep on pushing it. So I would like to hear feedback from you all. As to what I review next, it may be Ground Zero. I really am enjoying that game. It's an RE2, well, homage, but it's pretty much South Korean RE2, and it's been fantastic so far. In fact, if this video comes out this Thursday, I'm probably going to stream it even tomorrow, Friday. I actually can go and replay parts too, which is nice. But other than that, let's just end this video, shall we? As always, keep on gaming.